Sara Matthews walked slowly, her every step deliberate. The night air wrapped itself around her, cool but heavy with the tension she'd just diffused. Her heart wasn't racing. Her pulse was steady, measured. Just as she'd taught herself to be in situations like this, the anger she should have felt wasn't there. Instead, there was an undeniable calm, an inner stillness that told her she had done what needed to be done. As she moved further down the street, her eyes scanned the quiet horizon. The flickering streetlights cast long shadows, stretching like thin fingers across the cracked pavement. Savannah was a city of contrast, lush green squares lined with oak trees, their leaves heavy with Spanish moss, and behind them, the ugliness of institutional power, the stain of a history that never fully healed. She knew what she'd just done wasn't something most people would even attempt, let alone pull off with such quiet precision. She had not only stood up for herself, but had also sent a clear message to anyone watching, the type of message that didn't need words to be understood. And yet, as she walked away from the confrontation, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within her. The satisfaction wasn't just from her ability to overpower one of those officers, it was from the fact that she had claimed her space in a world that tried so hard to make her feel small. She had faced the abuse, the degradation, and instead of shrinking, she had pushed back. A slight breeze ruffled her skirt as she approached the corner where her car was parked, but just before she could reach for the door handle, a voice broke the silence. "Hey." The voice was soft, but firm, carrying a mixture of fear and respect. Sara froze. It wasn't one of the officers from the cruiser. A young man, perhaps in his 20s, stepped out from the shadows of a nearby alley. He was wearing a hoodie and jeans, his eyes wide as he took in Sara's stance. There was something in his gaze, something that mirrored the recognition Sara had seen in herself years ago, when she realized that standing up wasn't just about fighting back. It was about reclaiming what was hers, what was rightfully hers. "You all right?" he asked, his voice hesitant but filled with curiosity. Sara paused for a moment before answering. "I'm fine," she said, her voice soft but carrying an undercurrent of strength. The young man's eyes flickered to the distance toward the spot where the cruiser had been, and then back to Sara. "I saw what happened," he said quietly. I didn't know what to do. I thought they were going to hurt you." Sara shook her head slightly. "No one's going to hurt me. Not anymore." He looked down at the ground for a moment, the weight of the night pressing down on him. That was something," he said, his voice laced with admiration and something else. A quiet awe. You handled them." A small smile touched Sara's lips. "It's not about handling them," she said, taking a step closer to him. "It's about knowing that you have the power to choose how you respond. They came at me with disrespect. I just didn't let them win." The young man nodded, as though he were digesting her words. I don't think I could have done what you did," he said, shaking his head. "I wouldn't even know where to start." Sara's smile deepened, and she reached out, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "You've got more power in you than you realize. It's not about fighting back with violence, it's about standing in your truth. That's how you win." The young man looked at her with wide eyes, as if the weight of her words was sinking in. Sara didn't stay long. There was no need to draw out the conversation. Her work wasn't in speeches, it was in actions. She didn't need this man to thank her. She didn't need him to see her as a hero. She was just someone who knew that standing up meant everything. As she got into her car and started the engine, she glanced in the rearview mirror. The cruiser was still there, parked at the same spot, though the officers hadn't moved. She couldn't tell if they were still processing the moment, still wondering how they'd miscalculated, or if they were already brushing it off, pretending it didn't happen. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Sara Matthews was no longer someone who could be easily dismissed. Her presence, her refusal to bend, would linger in their minds long after the incident was over. She wasn't a victim in this story. She wasn't even a hero. She was simply a woman who knew her worth and refused to let anyone forget it. The drive home was quiet. Savannah had already begun to settle into its nighttime rhythm, the lull of the city's heart beating beneath the surface. But Sara knew that this wasn't just another night. This wasn't just another brief encounter with the police that would fade into the shadows of history. This was different, because there was something about the way Sara held herself that left a lasting impression. Something about the calm, controlled way she had taken back what was hers, not with anger, not with fury, but with dignity, the power to stand in her truth. Sara Matthews had set a precedent that night, and though no one else may have understood it in that moment, she had started a ripple, a shift in the air, in the way people saw her, in the way they saw themselves. As she reached her apartment, she parked her car, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment in the silence. There was no crowd to cheer, no applause to signal her victory. There was only the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the world had just gotten a little bit smaller for those who thought they could take advantage. It wasn't a perfect world, far from it. But Sara knew that even one moment of standing firm, one act of resistance, could start a revolution, and she was ready for whatever came next. Of course, here's the continuation. The next morning, Sara woke to the soft light of dawn breaking through her bedroom window. She lay still for a moment, absorbing the stillness around her. The quiet hum of the world outside seemed almost foreign after the intensity of the previous night, but in that calm, there was also a feeling of resolution. The events of the night had left an impression, not just on her, but on something larger. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She reached over and picked it up, her fingers still slightly stiff from the tension of the night before. It was a text message from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. "Are you okay? I saw what happened last night. I didn't know how to reach out, but I just wanted to make sure you're all right. You're really something. D." She stared at the message, a small frown on her face. She hadn't expected to hear from anyone, let alone someone who had witnessed it from the shadows. It was odd, but there was something deeply human in the gesture, something that felt genuine. She hadn't thought about the impact her actions would have on others. She'd only been focused on the immediate threat, on protecting herself and asserting her right to exist without fear. But there were ripples now, and those ripples were beginning to form waves. She tapped out a quick reply. "I'm good. Thanks for checking in. Just doing what I had to do. Stay safe out there." After sending it, she put her phone back down and sat up, running her hands through her hair. The weight of what had happened felt a little heavier in the daylight, but it wasn't a burden. It was something else. A responsibility, maybe. She didn't know exactly what it meant yet, but she knew her life wasn't going to be the same. The world around her had changed, and perhaps so had she. As she dressed for the day, Sara reflected on the night's events. It wasn't just about what she had done to those officers. It wasn't just about winning some battle. It was the quiet defiance that had shifted something within her. She had faced abuse head-on, not with anger or aggression, but with a firm belief that no one could diminish her worth. It was a lesson she wanted to share. Her community needed to hear it, needed to understand that the power to resist wasn't always loud or violent. Sometimes, it was just in standing your ground. The day unfolded like any other. She went to the gym, taught her self-defense classes, and walked through the streets of Savannah with a new kind of awareness. Everywhere she went, she noticed the subtle ways people interacted with her. Something was different. There was a quiet respect in their eyes, something unspoken but palpable. Her stance had changed. She was no longer just a woman teaching others how to protect themselves. She had become a symbol, even if she wasn't fully aware of it yet. Later that evening, Sara walked into a local cafe she frequented, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee enveloping her as she stepped inside. The usual hum of conversation filled the air, but there was a shift in the room when she walked in. A few heads turned, some faces immediately familiar, others curious. Sara hadn't expected it, but she felt the weight of their gazes. "Sara," a voice called out, pulling her from her thoughts. It was DeAndre, one of the young men from her self-defense class. He waved her over, a wide grin on his face. She smiled and made her way toward him. He pulled out the chair across from him and she sat down. "Hey, Sara," he said, his voice still carrying that sense of awe from the night before. "I gotta say, you're something else. I saw the video this morning. I had no idea you were that powerful. You really put those cops in their place." Sarah's smile softened, but there was a glint of something in her eyes. "It wasn't about putting anyone in their place," she said quietly. "It was about not letting them put me in mine. You've got power too, DeAndre. You just have to see it in yourself." He leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "I get it," he said slowly. "But it was different last night. You were calm, like you knew exactly what you were doing. I don't know if I could be that cool if it happened to me." Sarah's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. "That's because I've been practicing. Not just in class, but in life. You don't just wait for moments like that to show up and think you'll know what to do. You prepare yourself for them every day. When the time comes, you don't hesitate. You just stand in your truth." DeAndre nodded, absorbing her words like they were more than just advice. He seemed to be taking it in, realizing that Sara wasn't just a teacher. She was a guide, showing him something deeper than physical strength. She was teaching him the power of presence, of resisting without violence, and how to be confident in your own space. The next day, Sara received a phone call that surprised her. It was from the police department. At first, her heart skipped a beat, and the familiar feeling of tension crept into her chest, but this time, it was different. "Hello, is this Sara Matthews?" the officer on the other end asked. "Yes, this is she," Sara replied cautiously, unsure of what was coming next. "We've received reports about the incident last night," the officer continued. "We'd like to invite you to come in for a statement. We want to ensure that everything was handled appropriately." Sarah's brows furrowed. "Handled appropriately?" she repeated, almost incredulously. "Yes, we're reviewing the situation," the officer said, "and we want to hear your side of things." She wasn't sure what they expected her to say. Maybe they thought they could intimidate her. Maybe they wanted her to back down, but they had underestimated her. "I'll come by tomorrow," she said firmly. "But you should know, I'll be coming with a lawyer." The officer hesitated for a moment before replying. "Understood, ma'am. Thank you for your time." When the call ended, Sara sat there for a moment, contemplating the unexpected turn of events. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but this was part of it. The long game. She knew the system was built to protect those who had power, but now, it seemed, she had a piece of that power for herself. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from the same number as before. "You really made them think twice, huh?" Sara smiled to herself and typed back, "Just getting started." Absolutely. Here's the continuation and conclusion of the story. The next day, Sara stood in front of the police station, the weight of the building looming over her like an imposing giant. She wasn't nervous, not exactly, but there was a certain gravity to the moment. This was where the system had shaped her world for so long, where she had witnessed injustice time and time again. And now, she was walking through those doors, not as someone who feared the system, but as someone who would hold it accountable. Inside the station, the fluorescent lights flickered, casting a sterile glow over the hallways. It smelled faintly of disinfectant, the air thick with tension. She was escorted to a small room where an officer was waiting for her. He was clean-cut, his uniform pressed, but there was an unease in his posture that told her everything she needed to know. They hadn't expected her to show up with this much resolve. "Ms. Matthews," the officer said, his voice polite but with an edge of formality. "Thank you for coming in today." Sara nodded, her back straight, her gaze unwavering. "I'm here to make sure everything is clear," she said. "I'll answer any questions, but I expect full transparency on your end." The officer nodded, clearly not used to this kind of directness. He shuffled a few papers in front of him and began. "We're conducting an internal review of last night's events. We're looking into the conduct of the officers involved." Sara's heart beat a little faster. She could feel the walls of the room closing in, but she held her ground. "And I assume you'll be taking responsibility for their actions?" she asked, her voice steady. He paused, glancing at her with an almost defensive expression. "We'll ensure the matter is handled appropriately." "That's not what I asked," Sara replied. "Will you be taking responsibility for their behavior, their abuse of power?" There was a long silence. The officer cleared his throat. "We're reviewing the situation, but we do take these matters seriously. We want to ensure there are no misunderstandings." "I think the only misunderstanding here is the belief that this is just some incident to sweep under the rug," Sara said, leaning forward slightly. "I'm not here for apologies. I'm here because this is bigger than me. This is about accountability, not just for the officers, but for the system that allowed this behavior in the first place." Her words hit him like a sharp slap, and for the first time, he seemed uncertain, even a little uncomfortable. But he didn't have an answer for her, and after a long beat, he simply nodded. "All right, Ms. Matthews, you'll hear from us soon," he said, standing up. "Thank you for your cooperation." As Sara left the station, she felt the weight of the conversation settle into her chest. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she had planted a seed. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been silenced or ignored, about every person who had faced injustice and believed they had no power. She had shown them that one person standing their ground could start a ripple, and that ripple could grow into something more. The phone buzzed again as she stepped outside. Another text from DeAndre. "Hey, I saw the news. Looks like you've got the whole city talking now." She smiled, but it wasn't a smile of pride. It was a quiet acknowledgement of the path she had set in motion. She typed back, "Just doing what's right." Over the next few weeks, Sara's actions rippled through Savannah and beyond. People who had never given much thought to the ways systemic oppression worked were now talking about it. Her video went viral, and the story of the woman who faced down police brutality with calm confidence became a symbol of quiet resistance. People reached out to her from across the country, sharing their own stories of injustice, thanking her for being the voice they couldn't find. They saw her strength as their own. As for the officers involved, an internal review was conducted, but no one was surprised when the department failed to take meaningful action. Still, that didn't matter to Sara. She had done what she needed to do, and in doing so, she had ignited a spark that would continue to burn long after the headlines faded. Sara kept teaching her self-defense classes, keeping her focus on the people who came to her for help. She continued to walk the streets of Savannah with her head held high, her presence commanding respect. The small interactions she had every day, whether it was with DeAndre, the woman at the coffee shop, or the young man who asked for a selfie, reminded her that the work didn't stop. It was in the conversations, in the quiet moments, in the act of showing up every day with the same conviction that she had shown that night. One evening, as Sara sat in her favorite cafe once more, reflecting on the change she had started, a woman approached her, holding a little girl's hand. The woman's face was filled with gratitude, but also something else, something deeper. "Ms. Matthews," the woman said, her voice soft but filled with reverence, "I just wanted to thank you. My daughter and I saw what you did that night. You showed us what courage really looks like." The little girl looked up at Sara, eyes wide with admiration. "You're a hero." Sara smiled gently, her heart swelling with a quiet pride. "No," she said softly, "I'm just someone who decided to stand up. But you have the power to do the same. Never forget that." As they walked away, Sara watched them go, the little girl holding her mother's hand as they disappeared into the crowd. It was then that Sara understood. The true victory wasn't in the confrontation, the struggle, or even the acknowledgement. It was in the quiet legacy she had left behind, in the people who would carry her example forward. She had done it, and in the end, she knew this was just the beginning.